Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us, and welcome to another session of Health and You. So, the overall aim of this series is to try to raise community awareness about health and disease, to try to enhance self-care, reduce suffering, improve the quality of life, and to increase healthy longevity. Uh, so please keep in mind that this session is geared towards the general public. So this is not a CME CPD activity. So my name is Dr. Amit Abraham. I work here at the Institute for Population Health. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. So all of your cameras and mics have been switched off. Should you have any questions, you can please use either the chat or the Q&A. You can type in your questions and comments, and all of these questions will be addressed towards the end of the session. I will moderate the Q&A at the end of the session. And just to reiterate, there are no certificates of attendance that are being issued because this is not a CME CPD activity. So a little bit about our speaker for today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Aalia Al-Barwani. Dr. Aalia Al-Barwani is a double board certified physician in family and obesity medicine, a certified master in neuro-linguistic programming coach, and founder of Albidaya Wellness, a virtual practice focused on sustainable weight wellness and emotional well-being. With a unique blend of science, mindset, and holistic tools, Dr. Aalia helps high-performing women break free from the cycles of stress, emotional eating, and burnout to reconnect with their healthiest, most grounded selves. After years in clinical medicine, Dr. Aalia realized that the real lasting change isn't just about willpower. It's about identity, nervous system regulation, and healing the subconscious patterns that drive our behaviors. She now combines evidence-based medicine with coaching techniques like mindfulness, breath work, and subconscious reprogramming to help her clients thrive, not just survive. Through her talks, retreats, and immersive wellness experiences, Dr. Aalia empowers individuals to become active participants in their health journey. Her work supports the very mission of the series to enhance self-care, reduce suffering, and build healthier communities through self-awareness and personal transformation. I also want to mention that Dr. Aalia is an alumnus of Weill Cornell Medicine in Qatar, so we are absolutely delighted to have her give the session today. Dr. Aalia, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Amit, for that very warm welcome. And welcome, everyone, wherever you're joining from and whatever time zone. It's such a pleasure to be with you this evening, if you are in Doha and wherever you are in the world. And today, let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is near and dear to me, which is emotional eating. Let me go ahead and just get that. Okay, perfect. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about emotional eating, and I want to start by asking how many of us have found ourselves standing in front of the fridge or the pantry, not because we're hungry, but because we're looking for something. We've had a long, stressful day, or we're feeling a lot of anger or sadness, or maybe we're actually happy and we're celebrating something, and we're reaching for something, not because we're hungry, but because we're reaching for something else. This is what I want to talk about today, and I call it emotional eating. It also goes by the name of stress eating, and we're going to be exploring this together and see how it may be impacting your health. So as Amit very generously introduced me, I am a a Cornell alumnus rather, and I am in the class of 2009, so I'm one of the OGs, and I am passionate about helping people to understand themselves a little bit better on a subconscious level, which essentially just means you know yourself on a deep level, and that you're able to, once you have that understanding, you can change your habits and achieve your goals. So we'll start by actually, some of the objectives for today is include that I will be going over emotional eating. We'll be going over what that means and how it happens. We'll be looking at the effects of processed food on our health and the impact to our health as well. And then I'll be helping you to learn and start to build awareness around some of the patterns that you might be either exhibiting or practicing in your own lives, maybe unconsciously or consciously, and help you to learn some new tools that you can use on a day-to-day basis to help you to break that cycle, if that's something that you either personally are dealing with or somebody you know. And so I'll start by explaining or going over what emotional eating is, so we're kind of all on the same page here. And essentially, it's when we eat either to soothe, distract, and sometimes even to celebrate, rather than out of hunger or truly trying to fuel our bodies. And so oftentimes when this happens on a pretty periodic basis, we consider this emotional eating. And the reason this becomes important is that over time, this habit builds into our lifelong kind of pattern that can affect our health and our weight. It also affects our relationship with food, and that can have its own impact on our emotional and mental well-being. And so there are a few things that can help us to recognize when so question that I have, let me take a step back, is, well, sometimes I do this. Sometimes I eat when I'm celebrating, or sometimes I eat when I'm sad. Do I have emotional eating? And I want to make sure that I underline that emotional eating can become a problem when it is the main way that we soothe difficult emotions, or when we use it to distract from emotions that are happening internally. Doing it on occasion is certainly not an issue. However, again, when it becomes a pattern and we're actually eating because we're avoiding something that is happening internally, I would highly recommend seeking some kind of help or reaching out to have that addressed. And we'll be talking about the impact and why that's important in later slides. Common triggers are stress, boredom, loneliness, anger, sometimes even celebration. And the way that you can recognize emotional eating is that it's often automatic. Before you even know it's happening, you've finished your bag of chips, or you've eaten the whole box of cookies. And the other way that you would know this is that the cravings people usually describe these reaching for certain foods as a craving. And they're usually very urgent. They feel like, oh, I have to have this bag of chips right now. And so those are some clues that might tip you towards thinking, okay, maybe this is some emotional eating that's happening here. As I mentioned earlier, one of the most common triggers for this is stress. And so it's also known as stress eating. And what I'd like to go over here, how this happens physiologically in the body. I find that it helps to understand when you can understand what's happening, it kind of removes you from the process so that you can look at things a little bit objectively. And then there's less of this guilt and shame that I see with a lot of my clients that happens with stress eating. So the idea is that it starts like this. You have this stressful reaction to something that's causing you to feel stressed in your body, and that pushes up your stress hormone. Commonly, it's cortisol. And cortisol makes you think that you need to have there's some kind of danger, or there's something that's happening that you need some quick energy for, which then causes you to reach for foods that are typically high in sugar, high in fat, high in salt. When you do these types of foods typically activate the brain's reward system, and this releases dopamine, or that feel-good hormone, or chemical that we get when we are rewarded for something in our brain. And so when this is activated, essentially we feel relief, we feel good. And so then what happens is you feel good, and this causes this positive feedback loop, meaning you reinforce the loop from to happen again and again and again, because the end result is something that is a good feeling in the body, this rush of dopamine in your system. Now, this sounds like a good thing, right? You feel you're getting dopamine, this hit of dopamine. But if we take a step back and we kind of observe what's happening, I did say here that we're reaching for foods that are high in sugar, high in fat, and high in salt. I don't know anybody who, when they're stressed, says, give me a broccoli or give me an apple. They're usually one of these three types of things. And over time, in the clients and my patients that I have seen, this is the sneaky culprit that is causing either weight regain after they've lost weight, or that is contributing to their current weight gain and their inability to lose weight. So this will bring us eventually to the impact on our health. But before that, I also want to talk a little bit about the role that we talked about, the role that foods have. Let's talk about the role that sleep has. So oftentimes when we don't get enough sleep, we have also on a physiologic level, we have things happening where our hormone, again for cortisol, our stress hormone goes up, and our hunger hormones also go up. If you've ever pulled an all-nighter or you go to sleep late, you might notice the next day that you're more hungry than usual. And that's not just a coincidence. It's because of this biochemical pathway that happens where we have an increase in our hunger hormones, causing us to feel hungrier throughout the day. So if we couple the lack of sleep, poor judgment, maybe increased stress, we're going to definitely be making poor choices when it comes to food. And this can also increase or worsen our reaching for food, not because we're hungry, but because we're fatigued, possibly even. And as you can imagine, long term, this would affect your weight, and this can affect your mood as well. Now, I mentioned, or Amit did mention earlier in my introduction, that I talk a lot about willpower. Oftentimes when it comes to health and healthy habits, we want to glorify willpower and discipline as something that is the way forward, the way that things, in order to achieve success, we need to have just more and more willpower. But the truth is, sometimes things are not rigged in your favor. And as I just showed you with how the pathway of increased cortisol on a biochemical level and a hormonal level affects your choices when it comes to food, as well as when you don't get enough sleep, I want to talk a little bit about how ultra-processed foods can also have an impact on your choice and your ability to resist certain foods. Now, ultra-processed foods, I'm talking about, as in the picture, donuts or anything that is not a whole food, or that is not cooked in the home, for example, that may be packaged, or what we would consider fast foods. And there was a study that was published in the National Institute of Health that shows that, and other studies too, that contribute to this data that we're recognizing and realizing that the very act of processing our food is causing some changes to the food that make us want to eat even more of these types of foods. And so we don't quite have the exact mechanism yet. However, the study that I reference showed that when people were given access to whole foods and processed foods, when they exposed them, or they gave them a diet of whole foods for 2 weeks and then ultra processed foods for 2 weeks, and then they flipped them, they noticed that for the 2 weeks that they were eating ultra processed foods, they ate more of it, 500 calories more to be exact, and they also gained about 1 kilo over 2 weeks. And this is with them being able to eat as much food as they wanted in both food groups. And so what this underlines is that again, with ultra processed foods, there's something that's happening on a biochemical level that's affecting our ability to stop when we're full and to eat past our fullness. That's one of the things that we're recognizing. And then again, the impact of this is that we're gaining weight as a result of that. I think I might have already drilled home why this is important, but I'll still go over this slide here. And so we do see that emotional eating is linked to weight gain, and I have personally seen this in my practice of obesity medicine. And it's also been shown to be linked to stress. We do see with stress that happens quite a bit. This has impact on our energy, our mood, our self-esteem even, because we do, for a lot of people who engage in emotional eating on a regular basis, there's this feeling or this loop that I call the guilt-shame loop, where you indulge in this eating, you feel guilty, and then you feel shame, and that drives you to do that, to repeat the habit all over again because of that shame and guilt, not to mention on a biochemical level, as we talked about, that dopamine hit with the foods that we are choosing that kind of keep you stuck in that loop. Oftentimes, this guilt and shame in so many of my patients also cause them to eat in secret and maybe even binge eat in secret. Maybe they're hiding in their car and they're eating before they go into the home, or they're eating late night when other people in the home are sleeping. And so this can be very isolating and it can feel like you're alone. And so part of why this is an important topic for me is to bring awareness that this is something that is commonly happening and to remove any potential shame that anybody might be feeling around the subject. And I want to just highlight this image I have here on the side where it's, if we think about an iceberg, we always say the tip of an iceberg, and we know that majority of the iceberg is actually below the surface. And often all we see is overeating or obesity that is at the surface, but we don't know what is driving that. What are the factors, if it's stress, fatigue, loneliness, etc., that could be driving the habit, leading to what we see on the surface. And to touch briefly on Qatar and the obesity statistic in Qatar, the latest that I was able to find is from 2023, that 76% of Qatar's population is reported to have overweight or obesity. And among patients in primary care settings, 54% have overweight or obesity. And I apologize, I typically censor or screen the wording to change it to patient first. And so really these should say have overweight or obesity. We don't really say that they are overweight or obese, so I apologize for that. And the reason that this becomes important from a health standpoint is that obesity is known to be linked to so many chronic conditions, including hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, cancers, etc. So I think we can all agree that it becomes less of it becomes more of a public health interest, excuse me, when we think about it in these terms. Now, what is a quick way, now that I've kind of laid the groundwork for the importance of it, recognizing and how you can bring awareness to emotional eating, if this is something that you are either practicing or you know somebody who might be practicing, I want to go into some tools that you can use very easily to help break that cycle. As I mentioned earlier, it's an automatic loop that's happening oftentimes without your conscious recognition. And sometimes just by bringing this up here in this way, that can bring it to your conscious awareness so that you start to pay attention to these patterns. Another way that you can also start to interrupt that pattern is by pausing, literally taking a moment and recognizing whether or not you are hungry. And it sounds so basic, but sometimes returning to basics is what we need to do. And I want to share with you here something that I use with my clients, and it's a nutrition-based tool, and it's called a hunger satiety scale. And as you can see, it starts here on the left with 1, and we are going all the way up to 10. And one is describing how you would feel if you were starving. So you would feel weak, dizzy. Two would be very hungry, maybe a little bit irritable, low energy, stomach is growling. Three, you're pretty hungry and your stomach is beginning to growl. And we go up to five, where you're satisfied. And then past five, you're feeling slightly full, uncomfortably full, feeling stuffed, very uncomfortable, and so full that you feel sick. And sometimes, and for a lot of my clients who struggle with obesity and overweight, they've lost the ability to really hone into these hunger satiety or hunger fullness feelings. And sometimes this scale can be really helpful in recognizing when they are truly hungry and when they're truly full. And just like going to the gym, sometimes you have to go. You don't expect to go once and have the body of your dreams. You kind of have to build your muscle over time. Sometimes this isn't intuitive, and it takes coming back to this and looking at it and recognizing and checking in with your body over time to start to understand where you are on this scale before you eat, perhaps, or even when you're starting to feel those feelings of stress and you're reaching for food. The two could definitely happen together, where you're stressed and hungry. However, I think that this scale might be a really good way to help you to kind of piece those things out in the moment and start to break that cycle for you so that you can make a more mindful decision. Speaking of being mindful, this is an important part of what I teach my patients as well, is how to eat mindfully. And being able to do that allows you to check in with our body. We know that, and I'm guilty of this, I eat quite quickly. And so sometimes by the time I'm done eating, I have to tell myself to wait at least 15 minutes before I get seconds, because it does take quite a little bit of time for the signals in my stomach to get to my brain and tell me that I'm full. And I recognize this, so I always make sure to be mindful of that when I'm eating. Or I do try my best to chew my food slowly and savor every bite. But starting to practice this, if this is not part of your practice, is really helpful in preventing overeating, in learning to listen to your body cues and reconnecting with your body if you've lost that ability through different reasons and different things, whether it's disordered eating or overweight, obesity. And studies have shown that this mindful habit have been linked to better mental health and relationship with food. Another tool that I share with my clients and my patients is something called an emotional wheel. And it's exactly as it sounds. It is a wheel, as you see down here, and it has different emotions, the main major emotions that we tend to experience on a day-to-day. And as let's say you take a moment and you pause, you look at the hunger fullness scale, and you recognize that maybe you're not hungry. And now we're going to move on to see, well, let's see, what am I actually feeling? Because if you're not hungry for food, you might be hungry for something else. And recognizing what emotion is actually leading you to kind of reach outside of yourself can be the first step. So the way that we use this wheel is we start here in the center. And so let's say you've had a rough day and you come home and you're feeling sad. And then we start in the center and then we go outwards. So you can start to think, am I feeling sad because I'm bored? Am I lonely? Am I feeling depressed? And then outwardly here into the final third category here. And you may stop there and recognize, yeah, I'm actually bored and I'm sad. And that may be enough to recognize that, oh, okay, that's actually what's happening internally. And then, as I said, you're hungry for something else, thinking about what are the ways that you can fill that gap. Could you maybe reach out to a friend? Could you go out for a walk? Could you go to somewhere social where you can be around other people, where the movies, for example, but not necessarily to engage? Starting to think about different ways that you can fill that void rather than filling it with food. And so, as I mentioned, with kind of filling that gap with something other than food, this kind of leads us into emotional regulation skills. And so, emotional regulation really just means addressing what's happening internally, recognizing what's happening internally, and then addressing it. And so naming the feeling, actually, studies have shown just by using that emotional wheel to name the feeling, even if you do nothing else, can oftentimes reduce the intensity of those feelings, which I think is absolutely amazing. So just saying that I'm feeling angry in this moment can help you to reduce that, because oftentimes when we are in that state, we don't know what's happening, and we're in our heads and we're not in our bodies. But just checking in and going back into our bodies can be so helpful in reducing that intensity, and then being able to make more mindful decisions. And so, as I mentioned earlier, maybe you call a friend, maybe you journal, maybe you go and you exercise for a little bit. I think it can be really helpful, and this is what I encourage my patients to do, is to start to make a list. If you notice recurrent patterns, let's say sadness, we'll just stick with sadness. Sadness is a recurrent trigger for you, or a cue rather, for why you would reach for food. You make a list of things that you would want to do when you're feeling sad. Maybe, as I mentioned the list earlier, or you take a bubble bath if you want to have some more alone time. But just start to make a list of some things that you can reach for, so that in the moment you have that list to go to. And so just to kind of recap some of the things that we've already talked about with respect to practical tools that we can use, being mindful and pausing and stopping and even taking a breath. I also teach my patients to the power of the breath, and it sounds so basic, again, back to basics, but oftentimes when we're feeling stressed, we're not breathing in a regulated way. We're taking shallow breaths, we are not getting enough oxygenation, and we're also activating our sympathetic, which is that fight or flight pathway when we perceive a threat, and we're not kind of grounding in our bodies. So in addition to stopping, I usually recommend taking a few cleansing breaths, really feeling your belly expand and contract, and kind of focusing on that and checking in with your body in that moment. Next, you can start to think about using, I'll go according to this so I can stay on track, is this environmental reset, which means really keeping healthy or healthier alternatives visible and available, more easily available to you. Because again, if you have lots of whole foods, fruits and vegetables around, and you're like, I'm hungry, but none of that looks good to you, maybe you're really just reaching for a craving, and it's again not true hunger. Which leads us to the next checkpoint. What am I really hungry for? Is it food or is it something else? And then using the satiety fullness scale that we talked about, or the emotional wheel, to kind of help you figure that out. And then also remembering the importance of sleep and the role that it plays in your health in general, and also allowing you to make these better choices mindfully as you move forward. And so looks like we're at the end here. Key takeaway is that emotional eating is common, and it is a human experience. Sleep and stress and sleep and our food environment are big drivers in how we practice or approach emotional eating. Awareness and taking these small steps that I outlined with you today are really what it takes to see some real change in your life. And again, small steps can have a big impact. And these are my references. And I want to challenge and ask the group here. I would love to see it in the chat along with the Q&A. What is one strategy that you'll try this week? And that is the end of my presentation. I think I'm a little bit early, but hopefully that'll leave more time to answer questions. Awesome. Journaling. Yes. I'm a big fan of journaling. I think that oftentimes we think of it as a chore or something that is maybe daunting to do. And we're like, oh, I don't even know what to journal about. And oftentimes with my clients or patients that have trouble sleeping, a tip that I tell them is to literally just do a brain dump. Every thought that crosses your mind before bed, just put it on paper. And this oftentimes is really the secret to helping them to shut their brain down and get ready for sleep. So I highly recommend it as well.
We also have someone who says that they would like to make sure that they get proper sleep.
Yes, that is really important. And quality and quantity is really important. So making sure that it's restful sleep, and then recommendation is generally 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So those would be the two things to kind of keep in mind with sleep for sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
while we're waiting for anybody else to put their comments in the chat, uh, Dr. Alia, thank you so very much for that very insightful presentation. I think everyone watching here has basically learned a little bit or something that they didn't know previously about emotional eating and what things we can do, what steps we can take to try to manage emotional eating if we do have that. So thank you very much. I do want to take this opportunity to remind our viewers to put any questions that they have or any comments they have in the chat or the Q&A, and then I can pose those questions to Dr. Alia. So I'll start off with a question of my own while people are putting that in the chat. So I think when we think of emotional eating, we think of the triggers for emotional eating as being negative emotions, right? So usually it's things like stress, or maybe I'm feeling angry or afraid, something along those lines. But you did mention early on that there could also be positive emotions, right? Things like joy or celebration. So can you speak more about that, please?
Yes, thank you, Ahmed. That's a great question. And I focused on stress because it is one of the most common triggers, but exactly as you said, it can be what we consider positive emotions. And I really like to do quotes around positive because all emotions are neutral, they're just messengers, there's no good or bad emotion. However, as a society, we tend to label them as such. And so, joy and celebration can also be a cue for emotional eating. And again, if you think about patterns that we tend to have as human beings, I know I can remember that, like, as a child, when good things happened, I would ask for a treat, or we'd go out for ice cream, or we would have as a family go and celebrate. And I want to underline that there's nothing wrong with that. And we wouldn't necessarily call that emotional eating, just as if the opposite were true, if we had a stressful day and we did go out for ice cream or we had pizza, that would not be an issue. But it's when that becomes our main way of celebrating. Let's say that is the only way you know how to celebrate is to reach for food. And then that can become a habit that doesn't contribute to your health goals, or that might have you lead to a dysregulated relationship with food, because that's again being used as a way to soothe or to celebrate. And so I hope that's clear. I don't want to kind of repeat myself too much here, but it's really when it becomes our only way of celebrating in that instance that it can become a problem for us.
No, thank you for that. That was pretty clear, I think. We have a couple of comments in the chat talking about the role that thirst plays, because some people are saying that perhaps we might confuse thirst for hunger. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So yes, that can happen certainly. If we're not drinking enough water and we may be dehydrated, oftentimes our brains can confuse the two, in the sense that we believe that we're hungry and we reach for food, but we're really just trying to extract the water out of the food because we haven't hydrated sufficiently. And so typically using the hunger satiety scale will help to make that clear, because oftentimes if we're thirsty, we're not there's no rumbling in our stomach as there is with hunger. And so that can help you to distinguish, again, hunger versus something else. And then Also, making sure that you do stay adequately hydrated throughout the day. If you are trying to lose weight or just maintain a healthy weight, that can be a really important part of just kind of overall healthy nutrition too.
Okay. Do you think that there are certain times of the day that emotional eating tends to happen more?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, I would say in my experience that it later at night, and I think part of it has to do with what we talked about earlier. When we are fatigued, we may make poor choices, and or our hunger hormone might go up as a result of like kind of inadequate sleep or needing rest. And so, for those reasons, I do notice with a lot of my clients and patients that nighttime tends to be when we are reaching for reaching for foods for emotional soothing.
Okay. I want to take this opportunity to mention that this is a session for the general public, so it's not a substitute for going to see your personal healthcare physician, just so that we're clear over here. In
Thank
the meantime, I have another question for you. So, a lot of emotional eating tends to be revolve around shame and guilt, as you mentioned. So, how can we be more kind to ourselves if we notice symptoms of emotional eating? In your opinion, what role does self-compassion play in all of this?
Wow. Amit, that is such a great, insightful question. It plays such a pivotal role in it actually. When I am helping my clients to move through emotional eating, I help them to look at things very objectively. And I hope that by highlighting how really physiologically things may be stacked against somebody who is trying to break the habit through the physiology and what's happening internally. I hope that by shedding that light, that helps them to kind of step out of the picture and look at things a little bit objectively. And that can often give them that opportunity to have some self-compassion and realize that it's not something that is wrong with them, right? Because that's something that I hear at times, is that there is something wrong with them. And so there's that piece. And then self compassion and understanding that, really giving yourself grace and recognizing that we're all doing our best. I don't think anyone wakes up every morning and says, I'm going to find ways to make my life as terrible as possible, and recognizing that you are doing your best. And oftentimes that gets lost because we are comparing, or we're busy in survival mode and we've just got so much on our plate. So really taking more time to be mindful is another part of how I help to teach that compassion. And then lastly, and this is something probably a lot of people have heard, but it's a good reminder, is think of what you would tell your best friend or a loved one who might be going through something like this. We're often our worst inner critics, and we forget that we need the same love that we would give a loved one, because we love ourselves. We should love ourselves anyway. And so thinking about what would I tell a loved one, and then kind of just reflecting that back, can often help as well with regards to some of that guilt and shame that you mentioned too.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from one of our viewers. They're basically asking, is there any evidence to suggest that people who tend to snack more is there a correlation between that and emotional eating?
So yeah, it's a little bit nuanced because it depends on why they're snacking, right? And so people might say, "Yeah, I'm just a snacker," but really paying attention, and I feel like only you can, the person asking the question can answer this, is why are you over snacking, or why are you overeating? Is this because you are doing this automatically, and is this a habit that happens over and over again? And if that's the case, then there may be some emotional eating there for sure. And I would challenge you to pay attention to the patterns and to recognize triggers. And if it's affecting your health, right? Because at the end of the day, the whole point isn't just to call it out, but to notice the impact of emotional eating or overeating on your health. If it is impacting your health, then making that decision to be intentional and mindful.
Thank you. I have a question also from a healthcare professional who says that they obviously have very busy work days. And I suppose this could apply for anybody. But basically, because you're so busy, you tend to either mindlessly snack while you're working, or because you're bracing yourself for a very full schedule, you don't have much time, you just tend to eat very quickly. So what is your advice for people in this kind of situation?
Really good question because it's realistic. This is the life that we live in and the world that we live in now. And part of being mindful is recognizing this. So that's the first step here. This person asking is clearly mindful and aware of that. The next step is preparation, right? Now that you are aware of this information, how can you, what would it look like if your intention is to eat more mindfully? What would it look like if you were eating more mindfully? Does it look like maybe food prep, meal prepping either the night before or beginning of the week? Does it look like taking that 5 minutes to actually sit down and eat and enjoy your food in a mindful way? And so I think that it starts with the mindset. If you recognize that this is something that you intend to change, possibilities open up for you. And so I think that we can get really creative when we decide something is important. So I would say start by prioritizing this, and then the way will reveal itself.
Thank you. There's a comment also in the chat about someone who says that when they have some difficulty falling asleep, or if they can't stay asleep, that's when they tend to go and start snacking. So, do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes. So, and we know why, right? We've talked about this a couple of times or already covered why that happens when we're not resting. And so, really, I would say because again, it's nuanced. Talking to your healthcare provider and your healthcare team to help you address your inability to sleep. What is it actually that's keeping you from sleeping? It could be something pathologic like restless leg syndrome, something that can be medically treated. It could be overthinking. So journaling and doing that brain dump that I mentioned might be helpful. So because again, it's nuanced, I would say go ahead and reach out to your healthcare team to see how you can improve your sleep.
Okay. Another question I had. Um, so let's say we have recognized that, we are guilty of emotional eating once in a way. What does recovery look like? How long does it take to get to a place where you say, we're now okay? Is it a straight line? Does it go up and down? What are your thoughts on that?
Amazing question, Amit. So it is, I think with life in general, there's very few straight lines. And as you can imagine, I think that it's something that is a practice, just like anything that you're working on in life as a practice. And so it goes back to a little bit of that self-compassion and giving yourself grace and recognizing that this is something that you're intentionally moving towards. And there'll be days when you fail completely and you just stay home and you eat a bag of chips and cookies and you get up the next day and you try again. And it definitely is a journey. When it comes to working with my clients and my patients, I teach this mindfulness because it's so important for all aspects of our life, and so it's a practice. And when you're practicing something, I want to share something my patient said is that the way that she knows she'll always continue this practice is because that's what it is. If you're practicing, you can't fail. And I love that when she said that because I was like, I found that so profound because oftentimes we are all or nothing. And this way of looking at things makes it so that we get up and try again the next day.
Okay. Yeah, that is absolutely inspirational. Um, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I think then I'll ask you one more question in terms of if you have one or two key takeaways that you want the people attending the seminar to keep in mind, what would you say?
Yeah, that's great. I would say one is to recognize that this is something that is, again, I mentioned a human experience and that you're not alone in feeling or indulging in emotional eating. And so bringing that to awareness and seeking help if you are really struggling and it's impacting your health in a profound way. And the other is understanding and recognizing that with emotional eating, it's often because your body is your when you drop into your body and you kind of check in with yourself, it's because you're hungry for something else. And oftentimes, the reason that food is the best soother is it's legal and it's no matter what you're experiencing, anything that provides that sugary, fatty rush will soothe that emotion because of that dopamine hit. And so recognizing that, okay, this is what's happening in my body, but it doesn't mean that this is a solution that my body is looking for. So, what is it that I actually need in this moment? And I think continuing to practice that and ask yourself, what do I need in this moment, can really help to open doors to possibility, to community, and connection.
Excellent. I do see one more question in the chat for you. Do you think that meal timing or diet quality can affect whether we're more inclined to snack or not?
Yes, that's a no, I am so impressed with the quality of the questions here. Thank you. Yes, that is a really good question. And yes, it does. Oftentimes, I notice that for a lot of my clients that come to me, they have lived this life of chronic dieting. And so there's a lot of calorie restriction, a lot of they call it intermittent fasting, but it's really starvation. They're just not eating all day and then they get home and then they binge eat. And so yes, really paying attention to meeting your nutritional needs, whether that means talking to a nutritionist if you're not aware what that means for you specifically, but really eating whole meals, addressing your macronutrients and some of, I consider that to be your carbohydrates, your protein, your fat. I consider actually water and fiber to be macronutrients too, so I'm going to throw those in there. So making sure that you're really addressing that throughout your day and not really, and if you do it fast, that's fine too, but trying to make sure that when you do eat, that it's intentional, that it's planned, and that you are still eating a nutritionally balanced meal. We do find, or I have found that when we are not eating enough calories for what we need to do throughout the day, we tend to crave more. I notice that it's particularly in women when we're not eating enough protein and fiber that we tend to make poor choices and we tend to eat a lot more of those high sugar, high carb foods. So yes, the question is very well planned for this session because it does make a big difference.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in this chat, so I want to take the opportunity, Dr. Aalia, to thank you very much for that very enlightening presentation. And I also want to thank all of our audience who have joined us today. Please do join us for our next session. We will make sure to advertise it in due course. Thank you very
I'm
much,
sorry.
everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I do see one just come in. If I may just address it quickly, it says, "How do we simply differentiate if there's real hunger and emotional hunger?"
Yes, go
To,
ahead.
to recap it really quickly without going over the whole presentation, it's really just addressing the hunger fullness scale that I shared in the slides, and I believe they will be available. Amit, correct? The recording will be available. So using that scale can really help you to differentiate real hunger from something else.
Thank you.
Bruce.
Okay, I think then that is pretty much it. Thank you once again, Dr. Alia, for joining us. And thank you to our audience as well. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone for their engagement.